This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello listeners, happy Wednesday. You are joining me, your host for this evening, Sophie Smith-Tong, on the Late Late Show. Tonight we're joined by Matt Baller, Early Years Development Lead and Child Positive Mental Health and Wellbeing Specialist. We'll be discussing mental health and wellbeing in the early years foundation stage and exploring the barriers us EYFS practitioners face when supporting the mental health of the youngest of children. So grab a cuppa and a biscuit and let's get settled.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Hello everyone. So anyone that knows me knows that mental health and wellbeing is my passion, and in particular mental health and wellbeing in the EYFS, as that's where I spend most of my days. So I'm thrilled to be welcoming Matt, who will be joining us in a minute. But just to give you a background on Matt Baller, he is a teacher of 20 years. He has extensive experience of teaching across all key stages, with a specialism in early years. He's currently working as the head of early years and development lead for a school in South London and teaches full-time, as well as overseeing wellbeing and mental health for staff and pupils across the school. Matt's biggest passion is helping children to develop strong foundations in positive mental health, wellbeing and growth mindset right from the early years and up. Welcome, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on.
It's really, really good to chat. We first met at a conference where we were speaking about almost identical topics.
Yeah.
And the topic is the importance of mental health and wellbeing support and development. And I guess the development of emotional intelligence, you might say, in the first stages of life and first experiences of the education system. And we'll come to the education system a bit later. That will need some unpicking. But first, let's talk about the current landscape in terms of mental health and wellbeing in the early years. How are the present cohorts looking? You know, what people are calling the pandemic children. What are the challenges we're facing at the moment?
I mean, it is really interesting. I mean, I was at a profile moderation thing for the borough that I teach in today, and just hearing, you know, a room full of teachers talking, and it's so interesting in terms of current cohorts and how some of those effects of COVID have really played out in terms of some of those areas around personal, social, emotional development in particular. I mean, it plays into a much bigger picture, I think, at the minute. I mean, you only need to, you know, open any newspaper and you'll see that, you know, we are very much currently on a broader scale facing a mental health crisis, and that's not just with adults or teens. That is actually very much with children as well. I mean, when you think of some of the more recent data coming out, I mean, in 2021, they were saying, you know, 1 in 6 children between 5 and 16 could be identified with having a mental health condition. But actually recently that's gone down to 1 in 5, which is pretty crazy. Particularly also when there's other things that talk about, you know, just over 1 in 3 children and young people with a diagnosable mental health condition actually is getting access to NHS care or treatment. So that's currently 66% of children with a diagnosable mental health condition that are not being seen or have no access. So, you know, there's a lot going on there, and a lot of it increasingly we are seeing in the early years.
How much do you think, you know, there's several kind of things going on in the media at the moment, one of which is, you know, this idea that perhaps we're talking about mental health too much, that it's becoming anxiety inducing, that, you know, the focus and the reflection on it. Do you agree with that at all?
Well, so my opinion on it is that I think it's how it's focused on, because I think when you say mental health, I think the vast majority of people instantly think about mental ill health. And, you know, I'm conscious that even I've, you know, in terms of some of those facts that I was just sharing now, you know, that's very much a focus on the problems, but I also think it's so important that we broaden that discussion to involve positive mental health. And I think one of our sort of big issues and bugbears that I have is that our sort of societal response model for mental health is still very following a reactive model. You know, we
Yeah.
wait until someone has a problem before we then look to try and step in and fix it or undo it. And you know what and I know you do too, advocate for is a much more proactive approach, one that really goes back to the start of life, in the early years, when, you know, if you want to talk neuroscience, you know, the neuroplasticity of the brain is at its height when the brain is forming those habitual neural pathways. That is actually a great time to form positive and strong foundations in mental health. So rather than scaring people or putting, you know, too much too soon, I actually think there are foundational things that are, you know, really important for children to have. And increasingly, I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this. I notice children that aren't necessarily getting some of those foundational things. And
Yeah.
we're, you know, early years and beyond is so fast paced in terms of the sort of academic stuff. I think sometimes we forget, you know, so I always say this constantly, but you know, personal, social, emotional development is a prime area in the early
Yeah.
years out of the 7, and literacy and numeracy are not. And yet, how often do you go into a setting and very quickly you can see what the priorities are? And I think, you know, if you're thinking about like, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and talking about, you know, so often we're kind of pushing straight for that higher level self-actualization at the top, you know, that sort of academic progress, when
Yeah.
actually, have we spent the time really looking at those foundational layers that come underneath it to really make sure that children have those strong foundations in well-being, both, you know, meeting the physiological needs, but all of those psychological needs first before we leap on, you know,
Yeah.
like, yeah, I mean, I'm just conscious, you know, so one of my uh, children that is just coming to mind now was someone that really was part of my journey into this, really. You know, I was teaching in nursery, and there was this little girl who was one of the most challenging children I've ever taught, but I absolutely loved her.
Yeah.
She was gorgeous, but you know, she would be throwing chairs every day and effing and blinding and looking to scratch and punch. And but whenever it was story time, I started to realize whenever I would read a book about whether a character was loved or not, she would stop what she was doing and be absolutely spellbound, and she wouldn't be able to move from that spot until she knew whether the character in that story was loved. And
Oh.
it just made me realize that there is no point in me trying to teach you anything, because you have this underlying belief that you are not loved, that you are not
Yeah.
lovable. And it made me go, there's no point in me trying to do anything with you until I look to address some of those underlying needs. And yeah, that's what started me on that journey of, you know, how can we be, that's obviously a bit more of an extreme case, but for all children, how can we be more proactive in the early years when those foundations are forming, to make sure that they're formed well and formed right and formed strong?
I always find it so hard though, because I think we all know this deep down. I mean, obviously for you and I, it's kind of very obvious because it's the area that we work in and we're kind of working with that every day. But, you know, even for people working in early years that may not specialize in mental health and wellbeing, they know what they should be doing, but the pressures to
Yeah,
meet these academic
yeah,
achievements, these targets that we're given, you know, does the education system and the EYFS curriculum lend itself to developing emotional literacy in our youngest children? Because you talk about the
yeah,
prime areas and they seem on paper, funnily
yeah,
enough, on paper it seems
exactly.
right? These are prime areas, but like you say, we're not very often asked about those prime areas. It's usually how are they reading, how are they writing,
Yeah,
how are they counting?
yeah, and I, you know, I think this is something that's really important for us to stand up against, I think, actually, because I agree with you that I think a lot of people would recognize the importance of personal, social, and emotional development and emotional literacy, saying that it matters, but they don't always know how to go about it. And I think our current education system and the EYFS curriculum is very good at being specific about progressions in terms of literacy, reading, writing, maths. It's much easier to get hold of that. But
Yeah.
in terms of progressions for how to develop someone's personal, social, emotional development, I don't think it's as clear as it could be. And
Yeah.
I think we could be much more proactive with developing our own understanding of what it looks like to start here, take them to here, and develop those things more formally.
Yeah.
It's a prime area for a reason. And taking the sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs thing, there is some really interesting and exciting research coming out at the minute, which are these longitudinal studies that have tracked children from early years all the way up to mid-30s currently, and children that had strong levels of personal, social, emotional development, or sometimes they call it social and emotional learning, SEL. They went on to do way better, interestingly, academically, than children in the early years that got the early learning goals in literacy and numeracy, but didn't have as strong areas in personal, social, emotional. So it actually, there's a strong argument that if you concentrate on well-being, actually out of that comes academic progress, because what you're doing is build, they call it the foundation stage for a reason. If you get those foundations right, actually the academic learning comes off the back of that, because there's sort of three areas that I personally think, in terms of the work that I try and develop and do, focusing on self-esteem, character, and resilience are kind of three areas. So self-esteem, that sense of how I see myself; character being very much like the tools, like a tool belt for how I engage with my world around me, but also the tools for how I engage with myself. And that's
Yeah.
where that emotional literacy comes in, and helping children to be able to unpick that and have tools to understand what's going on. And then the resilience bit about how I respond, and I think that those areas basically lead towards children building a sense of agency. And I think when children have a sense of actually, so I would teach those things to the children as I am, I can, and I will. And actually that sense of self naturally leads into the academic progress that we all feel so under pressure to achieve. Actually, those children naturally go on and do it for themselves, because they've got that sense of, actually, I can do this, rather than this. I'm kind of excited for where education is going at the minute, because we're starting to move away from this.
I like that statement. I don't hear that enough.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a long way to go.
Yeah.
But I think that Victorian model of education, where it's like, it's about knowledge is power, and me teacher, you student, I'm just going to tell you what you need to know, doesn't really work anymore. It's not serving the future inheritors of our planet, and I think actually moving towards this education system that is much more built around agency and about actually, in a way, the characteristics of effective learning. It's not so much what but do you have the tools to be a lifelong learner? And I think well-being plays a huge part in that, not just for now, but for life.
But the characteristics of effective learning have been in for a fair amount of time, right?
Yeah.
And the prime areas have been in for a fair amount of time. So just to kind of challenge this idea, do you think that, like, the children that are in the older years now that are going like in later primary and secondary, are they proof that this is working? Do you think it's working?
I think the idea of it is right.
Yeah,
I don't think we've actually outworked it yet. And I think that's where we can be a lot more explicit. Um, I think, I think everyone would agree that we want spaces in the early years that promote well-being, but I think it's about how we do that in a more empowering way. So rather than looking at just that element, well, not just, because this is very important, but almost like well-being by osmosis, the sort of, we've created a safe space so you feel safe, you feel good. I think that's great, but what happens when you're not around, or when they move out of that space and move on to another school setting?
yeah,
What is it that they're taking with them? And that's more what I would love to see us be more proactive in the early years, is really looking at what are the tools that these children can use now, but also moving forward in their educational journey, that won't just give them the tools to survive, but
yeah,
actually will give them the opportunity to thrive beyond that. And I think we set ourselves a low bar when there's a lot of talk at the minute about prevention. And I do think that's really important, the prevention of mental ill health. But I think we stop short there. Actually, we should be looking at how can we shift the dial, so actually we're giving children that understanding of agency to be able to thrive beyond that.
And I want to come back to the three statements that you talked about a little bit later,
Mm.
as kind of ideas of ways that we can approach this kind of this support, the tools, the tool belt that we can give the
Yeah.
children. I just want to break down what we've been speaking about a little bit further and ask what are the barriers and where is the pressure coming from? So this idea of the curriculum, and it's not
Mm.
quite working because of this focus on kind of the academic achievements. Is that coming from EYFS leaders? Is it coming from heads? Is it coming from boroughs? Is it coming from the government, Ofsted? Where is it coming from?
It's a really interesting question, actually, because I think it can come from multiple levels, and depending on every individual setting will be very different. Some will have heads of early years, or heads of school, if their early years is connected to a school, that are very protective and will actually be brave enough to say, I trust you. But I think if you get someone that is a bit more scared of, Ofsted's coming, then you go down that rabbit hole of, we need to prove everything. And
Yeah,
I think that can be a very slippery slope, particularly, with the way that the early years curriculum was changed and revamped recently. I think it was revamped for the better, but has that actually started to trickle through yet? These sort of things, which say, like within, the early learning goals, this taking away from the pressure to have recorded proof of everything,
yeah,
that actually teacher judgment is enough. And I think that's great. Are we seeing that yet in full practice? I'm not fully convinced we are. And I think it takes bold leadership to say, do you know what? We're going to take this at face value. If that says there is less requirement for paperwork, then we're going to do that.
yeah,
Because I do think this element of trust builds trust and releases early as practitioners to do more. If you're spending half your day trying to write down an observation and then record next steps, like, I think you've done your job. Or if you've done your job for long enough, you can naturally do next steps without having to write that down and record that somewhere. And
yeah,
your children. And I think, sadly, at the thing that I was at today, the profile moderation, this really came up, this idea of, when do you have time to actually just sit with the children and
yeah,
be? And that is where your well-being comes through that relational connection, where you can read stories, discuss. And I do think that particularly leadership has a role to play in releasing earliest practitioners to do that, because
Yeah.
I've had to sit down with my head and have some of those conversations and say, look, I know you're not going to want to hear this because it's so lovely for you to have all these, proof to higher bodies of everything that's going on. But actually, I will be a more effective teacher if you release me to really be with these children rather than spending the majority of my time recording down what I've done.
And then you get the real results. It sounds like the barrier really is fear, isn't it? Everything is driven by fear of not having evidence to prove that you're doing your job, which also links to what you said about this idea of trust and teacher autonomy.
Yeah. I think teacher autonomy is something where, it's a really interesting thing about how things are coming back around a little bit. I think with the introduction of the national curriculum and the earliest foundation stage, all the profile, I think that was really good in its intention to build some element of consistency across a very varied provision, from school to school, from borough to borough. But I think what it did do was put in this kind of almost taking away some of that freedom of teacher individuality, teacher creativity, to be able to roll with it. And particularly in the early years, we do have that slight bit more freedom to go, do you know what? I mean, it takes a brave teacher, and this is where leadership can go, do you know what? Go for it. Take a risk. Let go of your lesson plan and go with where your gut is going, because I guarantee you that's the gold. I mean, I know that some of the best teaching that I have ever done in the early years is when I've had the courage to let go and go, do you know what? We're going to roll with this. And that's when actually the magic happens and the learning happens. And actually, I think teacher well-being is wrapped up in actually being able to enjoy your job. One of the most challenging questions I've ever had from my my head teacher a year ago was she just said one time, she said, "Are you having fun?" And it literally.
We never get asked that. I like that.
And it knocked me for six, and it really challenged me. I was just like, fun?
Yeah.
What? And it made me go, actually, do you know what? I've lost something here. I want to have more fun, because when I'm having fun, the children are having fun, and well-being goes around,
Yeah. Right, we're going to come back in a minute. Let's find out what's happening in the news.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
With the general election approaching, some political parties have already turned their attention to education. All major media outlets have covered Labour's plans to add VAT to private school fees and the Conservatives' comments on increasing apprenticeships by getting rid of rip-off degrees. However, the BBC features a story on proposals by the Lib Dems to increase taxes on social media giants as well as companies such as Amazon and Google. The revenue raised, the party says, would then be used to fund mental health professionals for all England state schools. The tax itself already exists and is known as the Digital Services Tax, but the Liberal Democrats say they would triple the amount the companies paid in it. Recent NHS statistics reported by the BBC show nearly 340,000 children and young people are currently on waiting lists to access mental health services in England. In response, the Conservatives said they'd already increased training places for mental health nurses, while Labour said it would put mental health support in every school. In Teesside, the BBC Tees News website reports on Nigerian students seeking help from a food charity. An economic crash in Nigeria has left international students at Teesside University struggling to afford tuition fees, with some even blocked from their studies and ordered to return home. The manager of Thornaby's Sprouts Community Food Charity spoke to BBC Local Radio and said 75% of their clients were now the struggling students and that it was at maximum capacity. The university itself said it was providing support and that international applicants must provide evidence of sufficient funds when applying for a student visa. Nigeria is currently experiencing its worst economic crisis in a generation. The value of its currency has been depreciating by more than 200% against the dollar. As a result, students at many UK universities have seen savings wiped out and budgets having to be significantly reduced. Some students at Teesside University have complained that the university's decision to change the payment plan and reduce instalments from 7 to 3 have exacerbated issues. The university is offering case-by-case support to those affected. In Northern Ireland, the TES reports that Education Minister Paul Givan has warned schools they must make school uniforms more affordable and that a price cap is being considered. He said the cost of uniform was an unnecessary burden on families by branded clothing and uniforms being available from only one supplier. Mr Givan said proposals due to go out for public consultation this spring will include strengthened guidance on the school uniforms. The decisions came in response to a motion in Stormont on making uniforms affordable. Mr Givan said school uniforms create a sense of belonging to a school community, but that they should also act to ensure that pupils of all backgrounds feel welcome in the school. He went on to say that while many schools had followed current guidance around value for money, there are other schools which have not, and that this is not a situation which I am going to permit to continue. Further details on the proposals, which could also include the price cap, can be found in TES magazine online. Holiday prices feature in a Schools Week article on criticism faced by holiday company Butlins after it was accused of undermining schools' work to boost attendance. The criticism came after the company advertised term time breaks as great value getaways. The firm offers a 4-night midweek term time break for just under £20 per person, much cheaper than rates during school holidays. Schools Week reporters posed as parents and asked if the holidays were suitable for school-aged children and were told all breaks are suitable for all ages. Ministers have pushed all year for schools to improve their attendance rates, as persistent absence rates are nearly double pre-pandemic levels. Several multi-academy trust chief executives have commented that marketing holidays which specifically target term time is not civic-minded, but understood the attraction for families struggling to afford a family break, who are being exploited by the companies. Full details of the story are available on Schools Week's website. Finally, aposiopesis was the final word spelled correctly by 12-year-old Bruat Soma to win the 2024 Scripps National Spelling Bee in the USA. Soma takes home a $50,000 prize after spelling 29 words in 90 seconds and getting them all correct. For those of you who are curious, aposiopesis is a term used for the device of suddenly breaking off in speech. An example of this rhetorical device could be "get out or else," with the threat remaining unsaid. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
So, Matt, I've been thinking, and we got onto teacher wellbeing, and I'm aware that this episode isn't about teacher wellbeing, but obviously very, very closely linked to child wellbeing, no matter what age you're teaching. And I was thinking about this idea of autonomy, and it is becoming more rare, or at least it feels that way, that teachers are being given the freedom to respond in the moment, like you said, have that fun and just respond to the children, and that we know that is especially important in the early years, because when you try to write a curriculum or you try to predict what you're going to teach to three from babies right to year one really and beyond, but let's just focus on the early years for now, it's an impossible task, isn't it? Do you think teachers are kind of de-skilled in that area now because of schemes and this idea that we have to have everything planned ahead of us?
Yeah, I think I recognise the value in that, but I also think that the encouragement is to use that as your starting point to jump off. I think that's where I think if we teach to the test or teach for from the minimum, we don't, it doesn't resonate in the same way, I think, with children. Like, children are smart and they know. And when it's this is a lesson that you've taught every year, or you've done, this is your plan. But when there's this element of rolling with where they're going with it, it does have a lot more power. And I do think, it would be interesting to see. I mean, it's been a while since I've been back in terms of teacher training rooms, but is that something that is being actively taught and encouraged, this element of yes, have your plan, but have the courage to step out from it? Because I do think that matters.
Yeah, and it's interesting you talked about the idea that there's no clear steps in the curriculum to teach personal, social, emotional. We know what we've got to do in terms of maths and literacy. It's very obvious. You can almost touch it, can't you? It's tangible. Yeah. But in training, do you remember having any training about how you respond to children in terms of personal, social, emotional, or develop that area?
I don't remember having that. No, personally. I mean, I'm getting on a bit now, so
yeah. I was going to say, when we trained, it was quite a while ago, right? So yeah. I think it was like 15 years for me, and I think did you say 20 years for you?
21 or 22 years.
Yeah, so it could be very different.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I remember reading something early on in my thinking with this whole idea about being a bit more proactive with emotional education, was Alain de Botton talks about emotional education, and about this idea that we've become so good at passing on knowledge that people can pick things up in a matter of hours that took people years to understand. But actually, what we deem teachable is very interesting, because we teach science, we teach about rivers, we teach this, but we don't teach as much about emotions. And why is that? It's almost like we feel like it's just not, it's unteachable, or we're just going to leave it to chance. And that really bothered me, this idea of leaving that to chance, because it's not so formable as the way that you can teach about an oxbow lake, and I just thought, well, I'm not happy with that. I think actually we can be much more explicit about emotions and helping people to understand them. I don't think, you mentioned earlier about is starting earlier, talking about mental health and well-being from the earliest, is that does that have the potential for introducing anxiety? But I mean, I actually personally think the opposite. One of the most anxiety inducing things for young children is the unknown, is when they don't know something, they imagine the worst. Or the what's that song from Frozen, the Into the Unknown, like. But I think that's really powerful for children, this idea of not being afraid of the unknown, of going in there. And I think that's where actually, sometimes emotions can be a bit scary for children, particularly when they pick up subtle messaging from adults that there are certain emotions that are okay and certain emotions that aren't. And I got that in my own growing up. My mum, because she wanted there to be this nothing but love environment, there was no space for anger when I was growing up, and it came out of love. But what I picked up was this messaging that anger is not okay. And so I found anger really threatening, and I pushed it to the side. And actually, it was only years later I had to unlearn that and learn that actually, no, anger is really important. And anger is a message. It's telling you something, and it's good. And, I've really understood that in terms of, for children, helping them to see that there is no such thing as a bad emotion, and that all emotions are welcome and special and not to be afraid of.
And we have to think about that the response to that, don't we? Sometimes as practitioners, when we're asking children how they feel and they tell us that they're angry or they're sad, we give out subtle messaging with our expression, our body language. When we receive that information, we need to make sure that we're not responding in a negative way when they tell us that they're angry or sad.
Yeah, or trying to fix it. Often what we're trying to do is, you've told me this thing, that's negative. So what I need to do now is work out the quickest way to get you back to being fine.
Which I think is actually something that, I'm not going to name any names, but there's certain things that we do in classes where we have to move colours. And this idea of getting from red to green, I find quite problematic. I love using those things, but sometimes it's the idea, red is a bad colour to be in. We need to be moving to green as quickly as possible. How can we get there?
I agree. I think that element of, all the colours are just as equal, but we kind of want you to be in this one. It's like kids know, they're smart, they know that. And I think actually really validating, do you know what? You're feeling sad. That's it. Not right. How can we stop you feeling sad? Just tell me about it. What's going on? And so often children need space to co-regulate. And I think this is something that we can do more in the early years, is this thing about really prioritizing before expecting children to be able to self-regulate. They need to have it modeled. They need to be able to co-regulate with you. And
what does that look like?
So if someone is upset or if they're angry, you sit with them and help them go through that together and be like, do you know,
they're not on their own.
Yeah. And it's like, I see you. I totally understand what it's like. I would feel angry in that situation too. Do you want to know what I do when I feel angry? This might not help you, but what I do is I take a few really deep breaths, or I do finger breathing, or I get some paper and I rip it up. Do you feel like doing a bit of that with me? And just sort of allowing that emotion to be there. And sometimes in terms of the pre bit is also supporting a child to name, to understand what it is they're feeling, because children don't automatically know, and to just go, I wonder if, is it something like this? Or, often I try and encourage children to explain what they're feeling in different ways. So, if it was a color, what color is it? Or if it was an animal, what does it feel like? Because that's easier for them to get hold of in some ways than just be like, oh yes, I am feeling, it takes a while for that language, but then you can slowly model it with them. But I do think just there is a lot to be said for, and I'm sure you will have this in your own life, where sometimes when you're experiencing something, what you need is someone to just sit there with you. You don't need someone to fix it. You just need someone to be like, I'm with you, I see you, I've got you. But
Do we have time for that though, Matt? As educators, do we have time to sit? I mean, and this is the same. Actually, I want to talk about this alongside parenting as well, because when you're parenting young children, and we've talked about time already being so tight for teachers. For parents and teachers, this idea of just sitting with a child and giving them that space and that support.
I think you need to think of it in terms of investment. And, do you want to do a quick fix, or do you want to do something that ultimately will empower them to really step forward in their learning? And if you're like really focused on right here, right now, I need to get them to finish writing that sentence because it's about to be break time. You could do that. You could be like, I'm going to shut this down. I'm going to get you to do what I need you to do. Or you could go, do you know what? Right here, right now, actually, this child feeling safe, feeling seen, and feeling soothed, which are, I can talk about it later, but in terms of some of the foundations of self-esteem, that sense of I am, that sense of here in this environment, I am safe, I'm seen, and I am soothed. You will release that child moving forward to be so much more present, and actually in their learning will engage far more, do far more writing in the future than that forced bit of writing that you made them do that they didn't really want to.
But could this be the problem, that we're not seeing, we're so used to this kind of, we do something and we want to see the results immediately. And because in teaching, we're not necessarily being the ones that actually see the results, right? They go off and we won't see what our input, the results of our input. Do you think that might be part of the problem, that we want quick rewards rather than these long-term goals?
Well, again, it's this whole pressure about what can you show, like as into the outside powers that be, to Ofsted and all of that. Have you got your shiny penny that you can show me for the amazing job you're doing? And I think it takes boldness to go, do you know what? I'm planting a seed. I'm not shining a penny. Like, I don't care what this looks like right now because it's muddy. Like, it's gritty, it's muddy, it's not pretty, but this will grow into a tree if it's watered and looked after. And I think, there's this phrase that I heard. I grew up in Kenya, and I once was chatting more as an adult than as a kid, but I was chatting with this Maasai. He was head of his tribe, and he said to me, you will never truly know the significance of the seemingly small actions you take. And I think as early years, sometimes we need to lift our heads and look at, actually, we will never really get to see this, but the seeds that I'm planting right now, that is going to shape this person's life for their entire life. And we have an exciting role to play, and sometimes we need to step back from the painting and look at the whole painting, not just the tiny speck of paint that we're really focused on right now. And I think early years we could be more outward focused in terms of how we shout about what we do and our role, Sorry, I'm slightly digressing here.
No, that's okay. You digress.
I think that higher up in school circles, the early years is often looked down on, a bit like the abyss at the bottom of the ocean.
Babysitting.
It's this sort of like murkiness where people don't really know what goes on down there.
And they look horrified when they come in.
Yeah, and I think we could be better at showing and promoting externally, look, actually what we are doing is planting seeds that set the course, and there is so much evidence coming out now that actually, if those foundations are in right, particularly in social and emotional learning, their entire academic career, also their chances of going into crime, their chances, there's all sorts of statistics that show that those early things, the early years matter. There's that quote from Bill Gates that I love, which is about the first 5 years have so much to do with how the next 80 turn out. And I think it's true. And, the early years, because it's been so maligned for so many years, I think it's rightly had to turn quite inward to protect itself and support each other. But in doing that, we've become almost like a bit closed off. And I think actually trying to build some bridges externally and say, look, whatever this government may say in terms of childcare, we are not babysitters. Actually what we are doing is forming the future of our society. And that message, I think, could build a bit more boldness to step away a bit, step back and go, actually, what do we want to do? What do we want to build with these humans? Because, yeah, I could focus on, I need to get you to write that sentence, or, I need you to complete that. Or you could think, actually, what is going to be useful for you in your life moving forwards? But that is going to take bold leadership on a national and global scale that goes beyond an election cycle.
Well, on that note, on the election note, we'll go to the ads, and then when we come back, we'll talk a bit more about play.
Cool.
Empowering education with Easy for You, where innovation meets accessibility. Our subscription-based offering not only equips schools with cutting-edge devices, but revolutionizes the learning experience by eliminating financial barriers, streamlining support, and embracing technology. We're not just providing tools, we're shaping a future where every student can thrive, unburdened by limitations. Easy for You, transforming education, one device at a time. Find out more at www.easyforyou.school.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Reading Solutions UK. Are you looking for best practices and innovative strategies to foster confident, lifelong readers? Join the free online International Reading Conference on the 11th, 12th and 13th of June. Hear from speakers like TV personality and education expert Basit Siddiqui, beloved children's author Michael Rosen, fluency expert Tim Rosinski, EEF specialist Chloe Butlin, the National Literacy Trust's Irene Picton, and a range of experienced practitioners, including MAT leaders, deputy heads, heads of English, high-level teaching assistants, and school librarians. Through the 3-day conference, speakers will explore a range of topics at the forefront of the current educational landscape, with sessions relevant for all educators and key stages. Visit Reading Solutions at readingsolutionsuk.co.uk for more information and to sign up for this free conference.
Right, so Matt, I'm breaking it down now, thinking about what we've covered in terms of looking out for mental health and wellbeing in the EYFS. So we're thinking about autonomy, both the autonomy of the child and the teachers, the educators, having some more respect for the early years on a whole, more time to spend with the children, and being bold and standing up for what we know is right is really important. And with that, we have people like, experts like Peter Gray, Ray Peaker, Ruth Swales, Sue Cowley. There are many, many experts out there who are telling us that play is vital for child development and overall mental health and wellbeing. So let's talk about play. How does it fit into mental health and wellbeing in the EYFS?
I mean, I'm conscious. How long have we got? Because
we've got about 5 minutes, Matt. What can you do?
5 minutes. Okay, right. I mean, this is a subject I could talk for an hour on, but anyway, play is the thing. Play is the vehicle that or the laboratory. It's the testing ground. Or I mean, the way I describe it with my kids is the journey. So I talk about a bit like sailors going out from the harbor. Like the harbor is like the safety that your carpet when they're all together, and then you send them off to play, and it's like sailing out onto the high seas on their adventures.
I love that analogy, because children really do, they're really the people that take play as serious, with the seriousness it deserves. Like with they go off, they do look like that, don't they? It's like, yes, we're off to do this job and we're going to do it well.
And it's how they, it's how they learn. It's that element of, so much has come in of this sort of cotton wool vibes of we need to protect children at all costs, and actually children need to fall over. They learn through play, through getting things wrong, through making mistakes and figuring it out, or risk taking, trying something and coming back. And what we can really play a part in is helping them form the narratives that come from their play. So I talked earlier about the 3 areas of sort of self-esteem, character, and resilience. And, a big part of self-esteem comes through play, because they are constantly forming this internal sense of how I see myself. And that comes through repeated experience, through the play that they're doing. And what we can do is help form those narratives that they can retell themselves. So when, I was saying about this analogy of sailors that go out on the ocean, when they then come back to the carpet to retell their adventures, they're saying, what happened, what went well, what went wrong. You can then really play a big part in going, wow, Matilda today in my class, I was like, wow, Matilda, what you just told me there, you really took a risk. You are really brave. I think you could say I am brave, And she went straight off the carpet after we'd had that conversation. She stood up and she went, I am brave. And she went off, and I think, those narratives, another time I can call that up and say, Matilda, do you remember that time when you did that? And it will slowly build into her sense of self, that risk-taking. And a lot of it is us trusting children enough to step out. And, we haven't got time to talk about it now, sadly, but I think, growth mindset is another aspect of really supporting children in their sense of self and agency and well-being, in the way that they think and approach challenge.
I feel like that idea of autonomy is just so pivotal. This risk taking, this idea that we put trust in our professionals and trust in the children that we're teaching to figure it out, to have that sense of exploration.
Yeah, and not being afraid of the mess. Like, what we want is, this lovely polished piece of learning. And actually, that does happen sometimes, but more often than not, the gold and the best learning is in the mess. And actually allowing things to go wrong actually often brings out the best learning. And I'm often saying to my kids, in terms of the resilience aspect, we teach this idea that mistakes are great. And actually when something goes wrong, we're like, that's great. What can we learn from it? How can we step forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the adult is so important in the early years, because it's what I love about being in the early years is the complexity involved in your role. It's not you stood at the front kind of, handing over a lot of knowledge. It really is very intricate, like Julie Fisher talks about this interfering or there's a point where we're not needed and we have to respect that space, and I really love that about the early years.
I mean, I think being an early years practitioner is so incredibly hard, and I wish I could go out on the street and ring a bell and just be like, hear ye, because what other job do you have to have about 10 hats at the same time and constantly be juggling? It's not like you're sending everybody off like higher up the school to do the same thing. You are constantly jumping in and out of individual situations, as well as dealing with all your challenges as well. It's an incredibly hard and exhausting job. So I think early years practitioners deserve gold medals for what they do. And because it's so nuanced, like you say, it's about knowing when to shut up. It's about knowing when not to do something, and that you can really hone. It's not something that comes easy, but when to just go, do you know what, I'm actually just going to step back here because you've got this.
And just to finish up, what tips do you have for those working with the youngest of children in terms of building up tools to develop their emotional understanding and personal development?
Oh gosh. For practitioners, what tips?
Yeah, so what tools do you use, I guess? What approaches do you use that people could just get started straight away?
Well, I may be interpreting this in the wrong way, but I would say in terms of practitioners, I'm just going to give some final things that I think are important. So firstly, I would say put when you get on a flight and there's that safety message of, if the oxygen mask come down, make sure you put your own oxygen mask on first before attempting to help others. And I think particularly in our role as early years educators, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first. You have to think about your own well-being, because you will not be as effective. I mean, we give and give and give because we care, but sometimes actually we need to, it feels so unnatural. But if you are placing high value on your own sense of well-being and giving yourself time, you will be far more effective in what you do. Other things, I'm conscious we're running out of time, but
no, go on, you go.
So I think some advice I would say is just be inquisitive, be an emotions or behavior detective. So much of what we do is trying not to respond to what's in front of us, but be inquisitive about what lies behind it, because that's what's going on. Rather than responding to Jimmy's just hit Terry, it's more thinking about, well, what's going on there? What emotions are lying behind that? And I think, actually, I always talk about with the kids and staff, the power of the pause. So just this idea of actually stepping back and just reminding yourself that I am not my thoughts or my emotions, but the observer of them. So this idea that actually, rather than being right in the thick of it and responding off the back of, I'm a bit tired, I'm a bit frustrated, this is the third child I'm dealing with in this way, just pausing, stepping back and going, am I regulated in myself before I'm attempting to regulate someone else? I would say relationships matter. So much about early years is about relationships with each other as adults, and with the children, really investing in those relationships, because children will learn so much more from you when they know that you care. I mean, that's kind of teaching you to suck eggs, but it is important. Being proactive. I talked earlier about, are we being reactive with our approach to wellbeing and mental health, where we're just dealing with children when they've had a blow up? Or are we being proactive? And in the calm times, are we proactively looking at how can I support this child to grow in their understanding of how to, we don't teach someone to swim in the middle of a tsunami. You teach them to swim in the paddling pool when things are calm. I think the more we can be proactive with who could we now work on to really support them now before they need it. And the last thing I'll just say is the importance and the power of vulnerability. I think, as practitioners, we often suck it up and leave ourselves at the door, and actually to our detriment. And we need to be finding ways with our teams of being more vulnerable and saying, do you know what, I'm really struggling today, and we need to support each other. And the children pick up on it, and the children know, actually, I am allowed to be vulnerable and have a bad day because I can see you are having a bad day too.
And then they can see how you manage it as well, right? You're modelling that response. You're modelling how you're managing your emotions.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Matt, I wish we had 2 hours. We've got so much to talk about. We'll catch up another time. But thank you so much for coming on and chatting tonight.
Oh, pleasure.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.